They were like his children in a way, if you know what I mean. But he said I was to give them to the library. He wouldn't need them again. The net result of all this being that a puzzled and irritated commissioner of police was that afternoon asked for another guard, this time to watch the house behind the library, was also requested to issue a general alarm for one Robert Daniels, street cleaner to the Department of Public Works, and was left to read and study a mass of aged and not too clean clippings from a city in an adjoining state. What's the big idea, Dean? He demanded. If you think this fellow Daniels is the killer, why don't you say so? I haven't any idea that he is the killer, Dean replied soberly. What I want to do is to save his life. But on the Crescent we still remained in ignorance of all this. The only news I had was that Lizzie, from the Talbots, had not returned from Mr. Lancaster's funeral. That came to me at my lonely dinner, via Annie and the grapevine telegraph, and lost nothing in the telling. Briefly, Lizzie had been acting in a strange manner all week. She had eaten scarcely anything, and had been so hard to get along with that she and Mrs. Talbot had had a frightful fuss early that day. The whole house had heard it, and no one had been greatly surprised when Lizzie at once went to her room and packed her old-fashioned valise. They were surprised, however, to see her come out to the servants' car. It is our custom on such occasions to supply our domestics with transportation, and to drive quietly enough to the cemetery. The valise she placed in front, beside the driver. It was not until the return journey that she spoke at all, and then it was only to the chauffeur. She reached through the window in front of her and touched him on the shoulder. "I'll get out here," she said. Some one of the women tried to say goodbye to her, but she paid no attention, and the last they saw of her she was standing with her valise at her feet and apparently waiting for an interurban car. "Well, we understood well enough, miss," Annie said. Her sister's got a farm out near Hollytree. But to go off like that, with all of us knowing her for years, well, I suppose she felt pretty bad, with one thing and another. I'm not one to hold a grudge against her. It seemed natural enough to me, knowing Lizzie's dour manner. During all my early years she had terrified me. She had beaten George within an inch of his life when he had frightened me with the dumbwaiter, and had then taken the black and some of the skin off his nose with Sapolio. And she had smacked me soundly once when she found me in the Talbot stable trying to smoke a seed pod from their Indian cigar tree. A hard, dauntless woman, Lizzie, whose other name I have never even heard up to that time, and whose jet-black dyed hair was as familiar to me as the ancient cameo pin with which she pinned her high collar. But I was less easy about her after George Talbot had been in to see me that evening. He had been following all sorts of police clues throughout the day, and he looked dirty and tired. Mother was still shut away in high dudgeon when he came into the library and put a copy of the tabloid into my hands. I suppose you've seen this dirty stuff, Lou? Yes. And you knew the story before? I really don't know any story, George. I overheard some talk a night or two ago, but... And that's been the great secret, he said disgustedly. All these years I've known there was one. I've known damned well too that everybody else along here knew it, except you perhaps. And now this filthy paper brings it out and just about intimates that my father's back and at the old tricks. By God, for a plugged nickel I'd go down and beat up the lot of them. He quieted down after a time. He seemed indeed more annoyed that this great secret had turned out as it had than for any other reason. Look what it's done to us, he said. We lived locked up and bolted away. And why? He wasn't crazy. That was a trick to save his neck, and I'm darned glad he did. Glad he escaped from their lunatic asylum too. A man gets caught by a pretty face, runs away with it, takes another name, and then is found one day in a hotel room with a gun in his hand and the woman dead. She's wrecked him, and he finishes her. And for almost 30 years Mother expects him to come back and shoot her too. Why? She didn't mean anything to him. I doubt she ever did. With which unfilial remark he got up. The only decently normal person left in the house was Lizzie, he said. Now I suppose you know she's left. Driven off, I suppose, like Aunt Lydia. George, do you think your Aunt Lydia simply went away?